Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a topic that, well, often feels shrouded in dense government acronyms, but it's absolutely fundamental for countless non-federal organizations across the country. I mean, imagine this scenario. You're leading a cutting-edge research team at a university, or maybe you run a highly specialized manufacturing firm. A new contract or grant lands on your desk from a federal agency, brimming with exciting possibilities. Great stuff. But then there's that crucial clause, right? The one that outlines your responsibility to protect something called Controlled Unclassified Information, or CUI.
Exactly. And that term, CUI, it pops up everywhere now.
It really does. And look, this isn't just about the massive defense contractors, the household names with huge security budgets. Not at all. This obligation extends to any entity that handles sensitive, unclassified federal data.
That's a key point. It's much broader than people often assume.
Think about it. Proprietary research data, critical infrastructure details, certain forms of personally identifiable information. I mean, if it originates from or is shared by a federal agency and it isn't classified, it probably falls under the CUI umbrella. It's more than just data, really. It's kind of an invisible thread of trust. It links you directly to the operational integrity of the federal government.
That's a good way to put it. Trust.
When they share this information with you, they are implicitly entrusting you with its security. And, well, that's a significant responsibility.
It absolutely is, and it comes with expectations.
Yeah, and the challenge, as many of you listening probably know, is that government documents can be notoriously dense. They can be dry and, frankly, intimidating.
Oh, definitely. Sometimes feels like learning a new language.
Exactly, but fear not. This deep dive, this is your direct shortcut to understanding the bedrock of CUI protection. We're talking about the foundational principles outlined in NIST Special Publication 800-171 Revision 3.
The latest revision, yeah.
We're going to break it down, make it practical, and hopefully shed some light on the deeper strategic implications that go beyond just, ticking boxes for compliance.
Right, understanding the why behind it all.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Sounds good. Our mission today is really to explore the why and the what behind CUI protection, specifically for you, the non-federal organizations. We're focusing squarely on those foundational concepts from NIST SP 800-171 Revision 3.
So not the individual controls just yet.
Exactly. It's crucial to understand that we won't be diving into the granular details of specific technical controls today. Access control, audit and accountability, things like that. Those are for future deep dives. Instead, we're laying the essential groundwork. We're establishing the overarching framework, the guiding principles, maybe the philosophical underpinnings that inform all CUI safeguarding efforts.
Okay, building the foundation before we put up the walls. Makes sense.
Precisely. It's about building that sturdy foundation before we start constructing the detailed security architecture. And, to truly grasp where we are today, we really need to quickly look back at the historical context.
The history lesson bit. Always important.
Well, yeah, because the real catalyst for standardizing CUI across the government was Executive Order 13556. Signed back in 2010.
Okay, 13556. Got it.
Before this, the landscape of sensitive, unclassified government information was, well, frankly, it was a patchwork. Really inconsistent rules. Each federal agency essentially had its own unique way of categorizing, marking, protecting what they considered sensitive.
Sounds chaotic.
It was. It led to immense confusion, significant inefficiencies, and maybe most critically, widespread security vulnerabilities. Imagine trying to collaborate across agencies when everyone's playing by different rules. It just didn't work well.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a major problem, especially with increasing cyber threats.
Exactly. Executive Order 13556 was specifically designed to rectify this chaos.
So it sounds like before 2010, the federal government was almost operating like a series of independent fiefdoms when it came to unclassified data.
Yeah.
Was there like a particular tipping point or a specific incident that really galvanized this push for a unified approach?
That's a really insightful question. While the executive order itself doesn't point to one single catastrophic event, it was more of a growing realization. The increasing volume of information sharing, the rise of cyber threats we just mentioned, and the growing reliance on external contractors and partners like many of you listening.
Yeah.
It just brought the inconsistencies into sharp relief.
Right. The cracks started showing more clearly.
Definitely. Agencies found themselves constantly re-explaining their unique rules, and non-federal partners were left trying to navigate this bewildering maze of conflicting requirements.
A compliance nightmare.
Absolutely. And this wasn't just about preventing breaches, although that was huge. It was also about enabling more effective and secure collaboration on a massive scale. So the executive order mandated a government-wide program to standardize how the executive branch handles CUI. The goal was clear: foster openness, transparency, and most importantly, uniformity in these government-wide practices.
Making it clear, more efficient.
And undeniably more secure. It really emphasizes a consistent approach across all agencies and their extended networks of partners.
Okay. And when it comes to the key players in making this CUI ecosystem actually function, two names immediately stand out, right?
Right.
We have the National Archives and Records Administration, NARA. They were designated as the executive agent for the CUI program.
Yep, NEDARI. The EA.
And then, of course, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST. Their role is providing the critical standards and guidelines, like 800-171, that transform that policy into actual actionable security practices.
That's absolutely right. NERA sets the policy framework. NIST provides the technical implementation guidelines. And here's the core challenge, the fundamental premise that really underpins this entire framework we're discussing.
Okay, lay it on us.
The responsibility of federal agencies to protect CUI does not change when that information is shared with non-federal partners.
So the buck doesn't stop at the agency door.
Not at all. This isn't just a suggestion. It's a non-negotiable principle. Consequently, a similar level of protection is absolutely necessary.
Similar level. That sounds
Yeah.
important, but maybe a bit vague.
It does, but the idea isn't about perfectly mirroring complex federal security postures, which, let's be honest, can be astronomically expensive and often overkill for non-federal systems. It's about ensuring that once sensitive, unclassified federal data leaves the federal system and enters your non-federal system, your network, your servers, your cloud environment, its integrity, confidentiality, and availability are maintained to a comparable standard.
Okay, comparable standard. So maintaining the security chain.
Exactly. It's about ensuring the security chain remains unbroken no matter where the data actually resides.
That makes incredible sense. It sounds like a complex journey, but a deeply logical progression from that initial chaos. So to guide everyone listening through this essential framework, we've structured our deep dive carefully. We'll explore the historical origins of CUI, the pivotal roles of entities like NARA and NIST, and the crucial rules that non-federal organizations like yours must embrace.
Right.
We'll explain it all with practical, relatable examples and clear, actionable insights. Let's jump into the very first building block then, the genesis of CUI itself.
All right, let's kick things off at the very beginning. The genesis of CUI. Executive Order 13556 and its vision. As we touched on, before EO 13556, signed by President Obama back in 2010, the landscape for sensitive but unclassified government info was, well, yeah, a bit of a Wild West.
Wild West, I like that. No sheriff in town for data.
Pretty much. Different federal agencies had their own unique rules, sometimes their own arcane classifications. Methods for handling what they considered sensitive, unclassified data were wildly inconsistent. And this wasn't just an administrative headache, It created significant security vulnerabilities. Without a unified, predictable way to protect this information across the entire executive branch and its vast network of partners, gaps were just inevitable.
Right.
EO 13556 was signed precisely to address the systemic chaos. Its explicit purpose was establishing a government-wide program to standardize how the executive branch handles controlled, unclassified information.
So if I'm getting this right, the fundamentally why behind this executive order wasn't just about standardizing language, like calling things the same name, but genuinely about plugging tangible security holes that had emerged from this fragmented approach.
Absolutely. Think about the sheer scale of it. The federal government shares an immense volume of unclassified but sensitive data with millions of non-federal entities every year.
Millions. Wow.
Yeah, think university research labs, critical infrastructure operators, small businesses supplying components, large defense contractors. The list goes on and on. Without a common baseline, every data exchange became this sort of bespoke negotiation of security protocols, often leading to confusion, delays, and, most dangerously, the significant inconsistencies in protection we talked about.
Makes sense. Inconsistent protection is basically no protection in some areas.
Pretty much. The overarching goal of the EO was clear. Foster openness and transparency, yes, that's in there, but fundamentally achieve uniformity in government-wide practices, make CUI handling much clearer, more efficient, and, critically, demonstrably more secure.
Okay.
It emphasizes a consistent enterprise-wide approach extending far beyond the walls of federal agencies to include all their partners, like you, listening.
That brings us to the what. key actions and rules stemming from this executive order. It wasn't just a lofty declaration of intent, was it? There were teeth to it.
Oh, far from it. EO 13556 laid out concrete requirements. It specifically mandated that the program's implementation align with policies from the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, and critically, with standards and guidelines from NIST.
Ah, so that's the direct link to NIST 800-171.
That's the direct link. This was the moment that set the stage for crucial documents like NIST SP 800-171, which we're dissecting today, as well as the CUI Federal Regulation, which is 32 CFR Part 2002. The order also formally introduced and provided the definitive definition of Controlled Unclassified Information, or CUI itself.
Okay, so what is the official definition then?
It's defined as information that law, regulation, or government-wide policy requires safeguarding or dissemination controls. But, and this is a really crucial distinction, it explicitly excludes classified national security information.
Right, so sensitive, needs protection, but not top secret spy stuff.
Exactly.
Okay.
That boundary is vital for understanding its scope. CUI is sensitive, often very sensitive, but it's not classified in the traditional national security sense.
I can only imagine the headaches this fragmentation caused before the EO. Let's try to paint a picture with a practical example. The confused contractor. Picture maybe a burgeoning university research lab back in, say, 2009, pre-EO.
Yeah.
They're collaborating on several cutting-edge projects, receiving grants from multiple federal agencies, maybe DOE for materials research, NIH for biomedical data, DOD for some sensor tech.
A typical scenario for many universities.
Right, and each agency, in turn, sends them data with completely different instructions for handling it.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. One agency might mandate this research data must be encrypted at rest and in transit using FIPS 142 validated modules. Very specific.
Okay.
Another insists this proprietary info must be stored only on a physically isolated system in a locked cage. No digital copies leave the lab. Super strict, different approach.
Right, physical security focus.
And maybe a third agency just emails, send us the findings, make sure sensitive bits are redacted, leaving the poor university folks scratching their heads trying to guess what sensitive bits truly means.
Yeah, redact sensitive bits is not exactly actionable guidance.
Not at all. It's an absolute compliance nightmare for the university.
Yeah.
They're wasting precious research time and resources just trying to decipher and untangle these conflicting rules.
Yeah.
They want to do groundbreaking work, but they're drowning in inconsistent bureaucracy.
And that is exactly the problem EO 13556 aimed to solve. By stating essentially, look, we need one standardized way to protect this kind of information across the entire government, it provided that much-needed roadmap.
Clarity at last.
Hopefully. For that hypothetical university, it eventually meant less guesswork, fewer conflicting requirements, and in the long run, far greater clarity and efficiency in how to responsibly handle sensitive federal data.
So this executive order, it really wasn't just some bureaucratic exercise. It was a fundamental shift.
Absolutely. A fundamental shift in how the government and its partners approach sensitive, unclassified information. It recognized that a fragmented agency-by-agency approach was just unsustainable and, frankly, a significant security risk.
The first domino.
It's truly the very first critical domino in the chain of CUI protection. It set everything else into motion and initiated this massive ongoing transformation in federal contracting and data handling that we're still refining today with things like 800-171 Revision 3.
Okay, that makes sense. Building on that crucial foundation, let's move to NOR-R and the CUI Federal Regulation, the program's guiding hands.
Indeed. So once you decide to standardize something as broad and pervasive as CUI across an entire government, you absolutely need a central authority. You need a singular point of truth, right, to ensure that standardization actually happens and, importantly, sticks.
Right. Someone has to own it.
Exactly. That's precisely where the National Archives and Records Administration, NORA, steps in. They were officially designated as the CUI program's executive agent, or EA.
More at the EA. Got it.
Their role is paramount because they ensure consistency across the board. They provide that single authoritative source for CUI rules and guidance. Then, the CUI Federal Regulation, specifically 32 CFR Part 2002, takes these broad requirements that NARA oversees and codifies them. It makes them legally binding for federal agencies and creates the enforcement mechanism for the whole program.
So NARA is kind of like the central brain, or maybe the definitive interpreter of what CUI is, and, more importantly, how it should be consistently managed at the highest level, both for agencies and their partners. Is that a fair analogy?
That's an excellent analogy, yeah. The central brain and rule maker. For the what? Key actions and rules, NARA's responsibilities are incredibly extensive and foundational. They are tasked with providing the overarching information, guidance, policy, and requirements on handling CUI.
That sounds pretty broad.
It is, and it encompasses several critical elements you absolutely need to be aware of. Firstly, they define the approved CUI categories in their detailed descriptions. This is absolutely critical.
Why so critical?
Because it tells you what specifically constitutes CUI. It gives it a uniform identity across all agencies and their diverse information holdings. Without this, we'd still be in that Wild West scenario with everyone calling sensitive things by different names. You need that common vocabulary.
Okay, defining the what makes sense.
Secondly, NORI establishes the basis for safeguarding and dissemination controls. This isn't just about what to protect, but why certain protections are needed for specific types of CUI. It provides the underlying rationale, the legal or policy driver.
The why behind the what.
Exactly. And thirdly, they provide the actual procedures for the use of CUI, detailing how to handle it in various scenarios from creation all the way through to destruction or disposition.
The whole life cycle.
The entire life cycle. Now, beyond NARA's general guidance, the CUI federal regulation itself, 32 CFR Part 2002, provides specific, actionable guidance directly to federal agencies. It covers that whole life cycle we just mentioned. This includes explicit rules for things like designation, how do you identify information as CUI in the first place? Safeguarding, how do you actually protect it? Marking, how do you visibly label it so others know it's CUI and handle it properly?
The CUI banners and labels we see.
Precisely. Also, dissemination, how can it be shared and with whom? Decontrolling, when does it stop being CUI and no longer need those protections? And finally, disposition, what do you do with the information at the end of its useful life? Destroy it, return it, archive it.
Wow, okay, that's comprehensive.
It has to be. And the regulation also establishes critical self-inspection and oversight requirements for the federal agencies themselves. This ensures they're not just issuing rules for others, but actively adhering to them internally.
Holding themselves accountable, too.
Good.
Very important for credibility.
That makes perfect sense. A central authority really needs to cover the entire journey of this sensitive information. Let's try to put it into a practical example. The CUI registry is a resource. Let's say you're a non-federal organization, maybe a biotech startup, okay? And you've just received a new contract that explicitly mentions you'll be handling CUI. Where do you even begin to figure out your obligations? Yeah, that can be daunting. Handling CUI, what does that mean?
Exactly. Your very first and most important stop should be the CUI registry. NRA provides this online. It's publicly accessible.
The CUI registry? Okay, bookmark that one.
Definitely. And this registry isn't just some dry list. It's a detailed, living guide. It's actually quite well organized. It will show you the exact categories of CUI that might be relevant to your contract. Things like control technical information, maybe for design specs, or proprietary business information for financial data shared with the government, or even privacy information if you're handling certain kinds of PII related to a federal program.
So it breaks down that broad CUI term into specific types.
Precisely. And crucially, it lays out the specific rules and requirements for each category. It details not just the category itself, but the associated safeguarding and dissemination controls mandated by the underlying law or policy.
So it connects the what, the category, to the how, the protection rules.
Exactly. NARA essentially built the comprehensive authoritative rulebook for CUI. They made it not only a foundational authority, but also accessible and understandable for everyone who needs to interact with this type of information.
That accessibility is key for non-federal orgs.
Absolutely. NARA's role is just critical because it provides that centralized hub for all things CUI. Without a clear, single source for definitions and consistent procedures, that whole initial goal of standardization from the EO would completely fall apart.
We'd be back to the Wild West.
Totally. It's the closest thing we have to a national dictionary for sensitive, unclassified information. It ensures everyone is speaking the same language and following the same guidelines, which is, frankly, an enormous undertaking in a bureaucracy the size of the U.S. federal government.
No small feat indeed. Moving forward, then, we now tackle the non-federal imperative. Why you're here.
Okay, this sounds like the part that directly applies to most of our listeners.
The why. Purpose and importance. This concept, frankly, is the core reason why non-federal organizations like yours need to deeply understand NIST SP 800-171 Revision 3. The document explicitly states, and I'm going to quote it because it's just that important, the responsibility of federal agencies to protect CUI does not change when such information is shared with non-federal organizations.
But repeating that key phrase, the responsibility doesn't change hands.
It does not. This is a fundamental non-negotiable principle. When the government trusts you with a CUI, that trust isn't conditional. It comes with an unwavering expectation of continued protection, regardless of whose system it's on.
So you inherit the responsibility, essentially.
You inherit the responsibility to protect it. Therefore, a similar level of protection is needed when non-federal organizations like yours process, store, or transmit CUI using non-federal systems. Now, again, this isn't about imposing federal bureaucracy wholesale onto your private business or university lab. It's about ensuring a continuous, unbroken chain of protection for that sensitive information.
Right. The security can't just vanish or, diminish significantly just because the data moves from a federal server to your organization's IT infrastructure.
Precisely. Imagine a critical piece of a puzzle. It doesn't become less critical just because it's temporarily held by a different person, right?
Good analogy.
Its integrity must be maintained throughout its entire journey. This safeguards the federal mission, whatever it might be, that relies on that data.
So it's really about extending the perimeter of trust and security far beyond the traditional government boundaries, making sure sensitive data remains shielded regardless of where it resides in the whole partnership ecosystem.
Perfectly put. Now, for the what? Key actions and rules. How do we achieve this? To maintain this consistent level of protection, non-federal organizations are specifically required to comply with two foundational standards. Federal Information Processing Standards, Publication 199, or FIPS 199 and FIPS 200.
Okay, FIPS 199 and FIPS 200. Can you give us a quick refresher on those?
Sure. FIPS 199, Standards for Security Categorization of Federal Information and Information Systems, essentially sets the framework for categorizing information and systems based on their potential security impact, low, moderate, or high. It asks, what's the worst that could realistically happen if this data or system is compromised? Confidentiality, integrity, availability, impacts.
Assessing the potential damage.
Right. Then FIPS 200, Minimum Security Requirements for Federal Information and Information Systems, defines the baseline security requirements, the minimum controls needed for systems based on that categorization from FIPS 199.
Okay, categorize first, then apply baseline controls.
Exactly. Now, crucially, the specific security requirements you find listed in NIST SP 800-171r3 are derived from the Comprehensive Catalog of Controls in another major NIST document, Special Publication, SP 853.
853, the big one.
The big one. SP 853 is basically the gold standard, the massive, exhaustive library of security and privacy controls, primarily for federal information systems. It's very detailed, very comprehensive. So what 800-171 does is essentially act as a highly tailored subset of those robust federal cybersecurity standards. It adapts them into a set of requirements specifically designed for non-federal systems handling CUI.
So it's like taking the relevant parts of the federal standard and making them suitable for non-federal use.
Precisely. It ensures that similar level of protection we talked about without demanding the full, often overwhelming federal-level implementation of 853, which would likely be disproportionately burdensome and maybe even impossible for most non-federal entities. It brings that federal cybersecurity rigor strategically to the non-federal space where CUI actually resides.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. It's not just dropping the whole federal book on you. This directly brings to mind the ripple effect across industries, especially supply chains. Let's consider a practical example, the supply chain effect. Picture a large government prime contractor, maybe a General Dynamics or a Lockheed Martin. They're working on a highly sensitive, perhaps even classified, defense project.
Okay, a big prime.
For a critical component, maybe some specialized electronics, they need to subcontract that part to a smaller niche manufacturing company somewhere in the Midwest. Let's call them Precision Parts, Inc.
A Tier 2 or Tier 3 supplier, perhaps.
Exactly. Precision Parts, Inc. might not typically work directly with the federal government. They work for the prime. But to build that specialized component, they need access to CUI. Protects detailed design specifications, proprietary schematics for a circuit board, maybe specific test results that reveal performance characteristics, or even vulnerabilities.
Right, information essential for manufacturing, but sensitive.
Definitely sensitive. Now, this smaller manufacturer is handling CUI, even though they don't have a direct contract with the federal agency itself. They're part of the extended supply chain.
A very common scenario.
This is exactly where NIST 800-171r3 steps in. It mandates that Precision Parts, Inc., using their own non-federal systems, must protect that CUI with a comparable level of rigor as the prime contractor or even the federal agency itself.
The requirement flows down the chain.
It has to. Why is this so vital? Because, as the saying goes, the security chain is only as strong as its weakest link.
True.
A breach at a small subcontractor, while seemingly remote from the federal agency, could potentially expose critical CUI. It could compromise the integrity of a larger project or even impact national security in some cases.
The downstream risk is real.
Absolutely. So this regulation, 800-171, aims to fortify every single link in that chain, from the largest prime contractor down to the small subcontractor handling CUI, all to ensure the information remains protected throughout its entire life cycle.
It creates a baseline expectation for everyone in the chain handling that data.
Yeah. And this really raises a fundamental point, doesn't it? This isn't about imposing federal rules on private companies just for the sake of bureaucracy or red tape.
No, there's a clear security purpose.
It's about ensuring that critical, sensitive information vital to federal operations, maybe national security, maintains its integrity and confidentiality throughout its entire life cycle, regardless of who is currently handling it.
Right.
It really transforms CUI protection into a shared ecosystem responsibility. It emphasizes that protecting the data is synonymous with protecting the mission it supports.
An excellent illustration of the flow down and shared responsibility. That leads us seamlessly to the next key concept, the specific purpose and applicability of 800-171r3.
Okay, so who exactly does this apply to, and when?
The why, purpose and importance. It's really critical to understand that NIST SP 800-177r3 isn't meant to be a blanket rule for all situations where a non-federal organization might touch CUI. It has a very specific, carefully defined scope.
Okay, not a universal rule.
Not universal. This targeted approach is intentional. It avoids overregulation where it might not be strictly necessary, and instead focuses its efforts on the most common and arguably most crucial scenarios involving shared CUI. The document explicitly states that it applies in situations where there are no specific safeguarding requirements prescribed by the authorizing law, regulation, or government-wide policy for the CUI category listed in the CUI registry.
Okay, say that again. It applies when?
It applies when there are no other specific safeguarding requirements already dictated by law or policy for that particular type of CUI.
Ah, so it fills the gap.
Exactly. It fills a crucial, often overlooked gap. If the government tells you, here's CUI, you're responsible for it, but doesn't explicitly tell you how to protect it in your specific non-federal context, maybe the contract is vague on security details. That's precisely where 800-871r3 steps in. It provides that detailed how-to guide, the standard set of requirements.
So it really acts as the default, comprehensive playbook for CUI protection when no other specific prescriptive guidance exists for your particular situation. It's the standard solution to a common problem.
That's a great way to put it, the default playbook. Now, for the what, key actions and rules. The primary purpose of this publication, 800-171, is to provide recommended security requirements specifically for protecting the confidentiality of CUI.
Focus on confidentiality.
That's the primary focus stated, though it's important to note that many of the controls inherently support integrity and availability as well. You can't really have confidentiality without some level of integrity and availability controls. The key distinction in its applicability is that it applies when CUI is resident in non-federal systems and organizations. This clearly delineates its target environment. It's about protecting CUI that has moved into a non-federal IT environment, your environment.
Okay, CUI on our systems, not government systems.
Correct. And crucially, there are also explicit exclusions. The requirements do not apply to non-federal organizations that are, say, collecting or maintaining information on behalf of a federal agency, or using or operating a system on behalf of an agency.
On behalf of. That sounds like a key phrase. What does that mean practically?
It generally means you're acting more like an extension of the agency's own operations. For example, if you're a contractor running a federal data center or managing a database for the agency under their direct operational control.
Okay.
In these on-behalf of scenarios, the relationship typically falls under direct federal regulations, like the Federal Information Security Modernization Act, or FISMA, and FISMA would usually mandate the direct application of the more extensive NIST SP 853 controls, the full federal standard.
So 800-171 is more for when CUI is just shared with you, maybe for a research grant or a component design, not when you're acting as a de facto extension of the federal agency's own IT operations, like a cloud provider managing their entire email system.
Exactly. That cloud provider managing the agency's email system is likely operating on behalf of the agency and would fall under FISMA and 853, perhaps through a program like FedRAMP.
Okay, that's a subtle but really vital distinction for non-federal organizations to grasp. It determines which compliance path you follow, 800-171, or potentially the heavier lift of 853.
Absolutely vital. And what's fascinating here is how the updates in 800-171 Revision 3, the latest version, actually reinforce this clarity.
How so?
Well, for example, the elimination of the old NFO control tailoring category and the increased specificity of security requirements to remove ambiguity, these changes all contribute to a more precise and effective application of these rules. They make it clear exactly where 800-171 applies and, perhaps more importantly, where it doesn't.
Preventing misapplication.
Right. It helps prevent organizations from misapplying the standard to situations like those on behalf of scenarios for which it wasn't really intended.
Okay, let's use a practical example. The research grant versus managed service provider to truly illustrate this vital distinction. Because I agree, it sounds like a point of frequent confusion. Imagine a university research team. They receive a substantial grant from the National Science Foundation for fundamental scientific research. Good stuff.
Yep.
The grant specifies that certain data generated during the research, maybe raw experimental results or preliminary findings, is CUI. But the grant document doesn't go into granular detail about how to protect that data. It doesn't lay out specific technical controls for the university's lab systems.
Okay, typical research grant scenario defines the data, not the how.
Right. This is precisely where NIST 800-171r3 steps in. It provides that missing how-to guide. It gives the university a clear, standardized set of security requirements to follow for their systems that will process and store that CUI. It's a perfect fit.
Makes sense. Fills the gap left by the grant terms.
Now consider a very different scenario. A large cloud service provider, say Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure, they might be contracted to manage an entire federal agency's email system. We're talking sensitive communications, maybe millions of CUI records as part of that managed service.
A huge responsibility.
Huge. In this case, the cloud service provider is clearly operating a system on behalf of the federal agency. Their security requirements would almost certainly fall under stricter federal guidelines, like FISMA, likely requiring FedRAMP authorization, which is based on NIST SP 853 controls, not 800-171r3.
Much higher bar, direct federal oversight.
Exactly. This distinction is absolutely vital for non-federal organizations to understand. Choosing the wrong framework for compliance can lead to significant wasted cost, wasted effort, and ultimately maybe even a lack of adequate protection because you applied the wrong standard.
Right. You need to know which rules apply to your specific situation.
It really highlights the thoughtful design of the framework, though. It doesn't aim to be a rigid, one-size-fits-all solution. It targets a specific, very common scenario where sensitive, unclassified information needs robust, standardized protection without direct federal oversight of the system itself. It's about empowering organizations like yours with a clear roadmap for CUI protection in those specific collaborative scenarios where the CUI is shared with you.
Well said. Moving on now to basic assumptions. The underlying philosophy.
Okay, the philosophy behind the rules.
The why. Purpose and importance. For any security framework to be truly effective, consistently applied, and, universally understood, it needs a set of foundational assumptions. These assumptions, though they're often implicit, maybe not explicitly called out on page 1, they are the guiding principles that dictate the entire approach and expectations of the framework.
So they're kind of baked into the logic.
Exactly, baked in. And understanding them isn't just an academic exercise, it's crucial because it helps your organization align its security posture with NIST's true intent. They ensure a level playing field and establish consistent expectations for CUI protection across vastly different non-federal environments, from a small machine shop to a major university. Ignoring these assumptions is kind of like trying to build a house without understanding the laws of physics. It just won't stand upright.
Okay, so these are the fundamental, maybe unwritten truths upon which the entire 800-171 structure is built. They define the underlying logic.
Precisely. Let's delve into the what. Key actions and rules that comprise these core assumptions underpinning 800-171r3. First, there's consistency across environments. The framework assumes that statutory and regulatory requirements for the protection of CUI are consistent in federal and non-federal systems and organizations.
Meaning the rules apply the same way, conceptually?
Conceptually, yes. It means the spirit of the law and the intent behind CUI protection apply universally, regardless of whether the federal government or a private contractor holds the data. The end objective, protecting the information, remains the same.
Okay, consistent intent.
Closely related is the assumption of consistent safeguards. Safeguards implemented to protect CUI are consistent in federal and non-federal systems and organizations.
So not just the intent, but the actual protections should be similar.
Similar in effectiveness, yes. This goes beyond just the spirit to the practical application. It implies that the method of protection, the actual security controls you put in place, should also be comparable in their effectiveness, even if the specific technologies or implementations differ between a federal agency and your company. It's about achieving similar security outcomes.
Okay, comparable outcomes. Got it.
Then a critically important point. This one often surprises organizations new to CUI, moderate confidentiality impact. The framework assumes that the confidentiality impact value for CUI is no less than moderate.
Moderate impact. What does that mean exactly?
It's a fundamental assumption about the inherent sensitivity of all CUI. In the context of FIPS 199, which defines these impact categories, low, moderate, high, moderate impact, signifies that the unauthorized disclosure of CUI could cause a serious adverse effect on organizational operations, organizational assets, or individuals.
Serious adverse effect. Okay, that sounds serious.
It is. This explicitly sets the baseline for the rigor and strength of the controls needed to protect CUI. It tells you unequivocally that CUI is not trivial data. It's not just public information with a fancy label. It demands significant care and robust protection. This assumption directly drives the strength and number of controls you see in 800-171.
That's a really key takeaway. CUI equals at least moderate impact.
Absolutely. Remember that one. Finally, we have flexibility in solutions. Non-federal organizations can directly implement a variety of potential security solutions or use external service providers to satisfy security requirements.
So you don't have to do it all yourself.
Correct. This acknowledges the diverse nature of non-federal organizations. You have different resources, varying levels of in-house IT expertise, distinct infrastructure setups, cloud, on-prem, hybrid. This assumption offers crucial flexibility in how you achieve compliance as long as the required level of protection, that moderate impact baseline, is ultimately met. It focuses on the desired security outcome rather than rigidly prescribing a single method or technology for everyone.
That seems very pragmatic.
It is. It's a pragmatic recognition that one size absolutely does not fit all in the non-federal world.
Okay, this is where the mindset of an organization truly comes into play, isn't it? Let's take a practical example. The security baseline mindset. If a non-federal organization thinks, oh, it's just unclassified data, so it's not that big of a deal, maybe a basic firewall and, locking the office door at night will be enough.
Yeah, underestimating the risk.
They've fundamentally missed that crucial assumption of moderate confidentiality impact. The no less than moderate impact baseline means CUI must be treated with significant care. It demands robust cybersecurity measures comparable in effect to what federal agencies apply to their own moderate impact systems. It's about cultivating a serious, vigilant approach to this sensitive data right from the outset.
It sets a minimum standard of diligence.
Exactly. And that other assumption about flexibility, it also provides critical strategic options for organizations.
Right. How you get there can vary.
For instance, a larger university with a well-funded IT department might choose to build and manage all its internal security controls themselves. They might invest heavily in an in-house IT security team and infrastructure to meet all the 800 and 171 requirements directly.
The DIY approach if you have the resources.
Right. On the other hand, a smaller engineering firm, maybe with limited IT staff, might opt to use a specialized cloud provider or a managed security service provider, an MSSP, that is already compliant or can help them become compliant with these standards. They can leverage external expertise and infrastructure to achieve the required protection.
Outsourcing some or all of the implementation.
Exactly. The key takeaway here is that both approaches are acceptable under 800-171, as long as the required level of protection for CUI is consistently met and can be demonstrated. It's about the outcome, the effective protection, not just the method by which it's achieved.
Outcome-based security.
Yeah. These assumptions, they really are the philosophical bedrock of 800-171r3. They tell you, unequivocally, CUI isn't trivial information. Its security should be consistent across federal and non-federal environments. And you have flexibility in how you achieve that security as long as the fundamental objective of robust protection is met. It's a very practical, outcome-focused philosophy guiding the entire framework.
Well summarized. And that leads us perfectly into our final foundational concept for today. The evolution of 800-171r3. What's new and why it matters.
the latest changes in Revision 3. This is important stuff.
The why. Purpose and importance. Yeah, it's crucial to remember that the NIST 800 series publications, including 800-171, are not static, dusty documents sitting on a shelf. They are living, breathing frameworks.
Constantly evolving.
Constantly evolving. This continuous evolution is critical because it allows them to address new and emerging cyber threats, think ransomware, sophisticated phishing, supply chain attacks. It lets them adapt to rapid advancements in technology, cloud computing, mobile devices, AI, and perhaps most importantly, it allows NIST to incorporate lessons learned from real-world implementations and feedback on previous versions.
So they actually listen to feedback.
They do. Think of it as an ongoing refinement process, making the standard more robust and more practical over time. So what does this all mean for you listening? It means the framework is getting sharper, clearer, and more adaptable to the dynamic cybersecurity landscape we all face. It's designed to be more practical and effective for you to implement, and less open to misinterpretation than perhaps previous versions were.
It sounds like NIST is actively trying to reduce the burden and confusion, making the guidance more user-friendly and effective in the real world. That's a huge positive for compliance efforts.
That's precisely the aim, and it's really a testament to the collaborative development process NIST employs. They take comments, they hold workshops, they iterate. Let's look at the what. Key actions and rules that characterize the significant evolution in Revision 3. What actually changed? One major change involves simplified tailoring. NIST has eliminated the NFO-controlled tailoring category. That was something specific to non-federal organizations in previous versions, and they've introduced a new control tailoring category for controls that are addressed by other related controls, ORC.
Okay, less NFO tailoring, new ORC category. What does that mean practically?
It basically indicates a more streamlined and less complex approach to how security controls are applied overall. It reduces some of the burden of interpreting when and how to tailor specific requirements, making the baseline application clearer. It's about reducing unnecessary complexity in the tailoring process.
Okay, simpler tailoring.
Okay.
What else?
Next, there's a significant refinement of something called Organization-Defined Parameters, or ODPs.
ODPs, right. Those are the bits where we fill in the blanks.
Exactly. ODPs are specific points within a security requirement where an organization like yours can define a value or parameter based on your unique context. For instance, how long a user account can be inactive before it gets locked, or which specific cryptographic algorithms are acceptable in your environment. In Revision 3, NIST has eliminated selected ODPs where the ODP specification did not significantly impact the security requirement. Basically, they removed some blanks that didn't add much value or cause confusion. And crucially, they've clarified the responsibility for assigning ODP values. By removing ODPs that offered little meaningful flexibility or introduced ambiguity, the standard becomes less vague, where it previously allowed maybe too much variability. But it still provides flexibility where it genuinely matters for effective risk management. This helps ensure more consistent application across different organizations.
More clarity, less unnecessary wiggle room. Makes sense.
We also see consolidated requirements. NIST has combined security requirements, or parts of requirements, with other requirements for consistency and ease of use.
Tidying things up.
Pretty much. This directly improves readability and implementation efficiency. It makes the document easier to navigate and understand. Rather than splitting related concepts across multiple requirement statements, they're brought together logically. This simplifies the compliance process, fewer places to look for related rules.
Nice. Anything else major?
Yes, perhaps most impactful for non-federal organizations is the increased specificity. They've deliberately increased the specificity of security requirements to remove ambiguity, improve the effectiveness of implementation, and clarify the scope of assessments.
Increased specificity. That sounds really helpful.
It's monumental, honestly, because it significantly reduces the guesswork involved in compliance. It provides clearer instructions on what needs to be done, which considerably lowers the likelihood of misinterpretations during implementation or assessment. This is where the standard truly matures into a more actionable guide, less like high-level policy and more like practical requirements.
Less implement strong security and more do these specific things.
Exactly. Now, counterintuitively, while some ODPs were eliminated to reduce ambiguity, NIST also introduced flexibility with ODPs in selected security requirements where it made sense.
Wait, they added some back in.
They added new ones or refined existing ones in specific areas. This allows organizations to tailor certain aspects, for instance, defining an organization-defined time period for inactivity before a device locks, or specifying organization-defined personnel for certain roles to their unique risk profiles and operational needs. It gives you a sensible way to manage risk locally without compromising the overall security objective. It's targeted flexibility where it genuinely adds value, not just broad ambiguity.
Okay, smart flexibility, not just vagueness.
Precisely. And finally, don't overlook the structural improvements. NIST revised the structure of the references, acronyms, and glossary sections for greater clarity and ease of use, and revised the tailoring tables in Appendix C for consistency.
The appendices and definitions got cleaned up.
Yeah, and while these might seem like minor, maybe even mundane changes, they significantly improve the overall usability of the document. In a complex standard like this, being able to quickly find specific information, understand complex terminology, and discern the relationships between different parts of the framework is critical. Usability is a feature, not an afterthought.
Absolutely. Trying to navigate dense government docs is hard enough. That increased specificity and the intelligent reintroduction of relevant ODPs really stand out to me. Let's take a practical example. Clearer expectations. Previously, a small or medium-sized non-federal organization might struggle with a somewhat vague requirement like, I don't know, implement strong authentication.
Right. What does strong mean exactly?
Exactly. They'd be unsure what that meant in practical terms. Does it mean password length, multi-factor authentication,
Mhm.
frequency of changes? They were left guessing how to implement it in a way that would be considered compliant.
A common frustration point.
With this increased specificity in Revision 3, the instructions are far clearer. For instance, a requirement might now explicitly state something much more direct, like implement multi-factor authentication for remote network access or
Mhm.
require passwords to be at least 15 characters and include specific character types defined by ODP, much less ambiguity.
Concrete actions you can take.
Yeah. Imagine a small IT team now having a much more direct path to understanding what's expected for things like device lock parameters, like setting the timeout period via ODP,
Hmm.
or event logging retention periods, again, potentially using an ODP based on risk. The new revision explicitly states what an organization needs to do or define, removing much of that ambiguity.
Makes assessments clearer, too, for both the organization and the assessor.
Definitely. These changes, they really aren't just minor tweaks. They represent a true maturation of the standard. They reflect extensive feedback from organizations like yours, directly addressing real-world implementation challenges.
Learning from experience.
Ultimately, this makes 800-171r3 a more practical, more actionable, and most importantly, a more effective guide for protecting CUI. It should streamline the compliance journey, at least in terms of understanding the requirements. It's a clear sign that NIST listens, learns, and adapts their guidance to better serve the community it protects.
A positive evolution for sure.
All right, let's bring it all back home now and tie these foundational concepts together. We've covered a lot of ground. We started our deep dive today way back with the foundational Executive Order 13556. That was the critical catalyst, right? Establishing that government-wide program to standardize the handling of controlled unclassified information.
Yep, getting everyone on the same page, starting in 2010.
We learned how NOAR, the National Archives and Records Administration, was designated as the executive agent for this program. They became its central steward, issuing the definitive CUI federal regulation, 32 CFR, Part 2002, and maintaining that all-important CUI registry.
NARI sets the overarching rules and definitions.
And then we explored that absolutely critical principle. Federal CUI protection responsibilities don't just stop at the federal border. They extend directly to non-federal organizations like yours when you handle this information.
The flow-down requirement. The shared responsibility.
This imperative drives the need for compliance with FIPS 199 and 200 for categorization and baselines, with all the specific security requirements in 800-171 ultimately stemming from that comprehensive NIST Special Publication 853, but adapted specifically for your non-federal environment.
Tailored from the federal gold standard for non-federal use.
Crucially, we unpacked the very specific purpose and applicability of NIST SP 800-171r3. Remember, it's designed to provide those tailored security requirements for CUI residing in non-federal systems, specifically when no other explicit safeguarding requirements are prescribed by law or regulation for that CUI.
Filling that critical gap.
And we clarified those important exclusions and generally doesn't apply if your organization is operating a system on behalf of a federal agency, where different, often more stringent rules like FISMA and 853 likely apply.
Knowing which standard applies to you is step one. Finally, we delved into the underlying assumptions baked into the framework. Things like the crucial no less than moderate confidentiality impact classification for all CUI, which unequivocally dictates the necessary rigor of protection.
Moderate impact. Got it.
And we highlighted how the latest Revision 3 streamlines and clarifies these requirements through changes like increased specificity and refined ODPs, directly making it easier, hopefully, for you to implement and assess your security posture.
So this foundational understanding, the history, the players, the scope, the philosophy, the evolution, it's absolutely essential, isn't it? It provides the why and the overarching context before you can effectively tackle the specifics of the individual security control families.
Absolutely. Without this foundation, the 110 security requirements in 800-171 can feel like just a disconnected checklist. Understanding the context gives them meaning and purpose.
It's fascinating how these foundational concepts not only set the stage, but also fundamentally pave the way for understanding the specific security controls that comprise the bulk of NIST 800-171. They provide the why that makes the what, the actual controls, so incredibly important and meaningful.
Exactly. And next time, we'll begin to explore those specific controls in detail. We'll start by moving into the world of the very first family, access control.
Access control, okay, sounds important.
Oh, it is. We'll explore how you manage who gets into your system's authentication, what they can actually do once they're their authorization, and how you enforce those boundaries both physically and digitally. Think of it as setting up the sophisticated access system for your most sensitive data environments, making sure only the right people have the right keys to the right doors at the right time, based on principles like least privilege.
Setting up the front door and assigning the right keys. I like that.
Yeah.
And that's just one of the 17 control families, right, that make up the complete NIST 800-171 framework, each one building on these foundational principles we discussed today.
That's right, 17 families in total. We'll be covering areas like awareness and training, educating your users, audit and accountability logging and reviewing activity, configuration management, keeping systems securely configured, identification and authentication, verifying users and devices, and many more. All meticulously designed to ensure comprehensive CUI protection across your non-federal systems.
Wow. Lots more deep dives to come then.
Plenty to talk about. We truly encourage you, everyone listening, to continue your journey of discovery with us. Understanding these frameworks isn't just about ticking a compliance box to win or keep a federal contract, although that's certainly important.
A big motivator for many.
It is,
Yeah.
but fundamentally, it's about becoming a more secure, more resilient, and ultimately a more trustworthy organization, capable of safeguarding the critical information entrusted to your care. It's really an investment in your organization's future, its reputation, and its ability to engage in these vital partnerships.
Well said. It's about good security practice, not just compliance. So, as you reflect on today's foundational deep dive, maybe consider this. How will truly understanding the why behind these foundational rules, the EO, NARA's role, the moderate impact assumption, the flow-down principle, how will that change your approach to the how of implementing security in your own organization?
Good question to ponder.
What stands out to you as the single most critical takeaway from this foundational deep dive? The one insight that maybe fundamentally shifts your perspective on CUI and 800-171. Something to think about. Thank you for joining us on the deep dive. We look forward to exploring access control with you next time.